Hi, Julie Asher, Recipes for a Sweet Life. Easter is just around the corner, and as luck would have it, I've got 2 new Easter sets in my Prettier Plaques Stencil series, which is part of my new stencil line. If you're not familiar with my line, please check out the video description. I have a link to it. It was introduced in November of last year, and I've got lots of gorgeous sets that are designed to make plaque cookies look prettier than ever by leaving an area in the center for the message to be exposed while the background also displays beautifully. Today I'll be working with my Easter stencil, which looks something like this. And here's the background piece for that. But in addition, I've got this other one called Easter Blessings, which is a little bit larger scale. Now these 2 stencils are unique as far as some of my previous stencil sets have gone, insofar as they have some tight-fitting areas where elements of the design overlap, like here with the branches overlapping on the eggs. And if you're not particularly familiar with your airbrush or just beginning to airbrush, those areas can be somewhat tricky. So in addition to showing you how to create this gorgeous cookie for Easter, I'm going to show you the right and wrong ways of using your airbrush, particularly when you want to get into tight-fitting overlapping areas like those on some of these stencil backgrounds. Let's now talk about what you'll need for this project. It's pretty straightforward. Of course, you're going to need a set of my Easter stencils, and let's just see what's in there to remind you all, especially those not familiar with them. So my stencil sets, if you don't want to buy the whole bundle, are also sold as separates, so check out the website for more details on that. But we're going to be using the whole layered set today. Let's see what's in that pack. First and foremost, you've got some instructions for how to do these layered looks, which is what I'm going to be going through more or less today with some variations. So hold on to that. That's a nice reference tool. Then you've got the gorgeous background stencil. That typically goes down first with a masking piece over it, which is to block out an area to leave room for the message. Then you've got an optional shading piece, which can be used to create some shading by lightly airbrushing or dusting on the interior of this stencil. That's optional though. Then you've got a frame piece that lies on the inside of the masked area. And then last but not least, the message that goes in. And my stencil sets are largely interchangeable from set to set as well. So as long as the message fits within another frame, you can mix and match from set to set. So they're really versatile that way, which is why I love them. So you'll need, of course, that set. You'll also need a couple of iced cookies. We're just going to be doing one the right way and one the wrong way today, so I've got 2. The icing needs to be dry all the way through. It's easier to stencil that way. You can lightly touch with airbrush coloring without the icing being dried all the way through, but sometimes I put weights on top, as you'll see, so it's nice to have it completely dry. You'll need something for holding the stencils in place, and you'll see I use a combination of things. Sometimes I use the Stencil Genie, which is a frame for the background stencil. Other times I'll use smaller weights, and then even other times, especially around the message areas, I'll use even smaller weights. These are magnets, but they're mostly used for weighting. This particular project has 6 colors, which is a lot. So that can slow down your production process. If you want a speedy airbrushing process, then by all means, do these stencils in 1 or 2 shades. They look gorgeous that way as well. But I like to dress them up for purposes of videos. So we'll be working with a pale blue, which has been custom mixed with white and a little brown. We'll be working with a spring green, which is green with a little bit of yellow. And then all the other colors will largely come out of the container. Pink, perhaps mixed with a little bit of white, purple, brown, and yellow. You'll need some airbrush cleaner. Airbrush cleaner is typically nothing more than alcohol watered down, so don't spend $1 to $2 per ounce on it by buying it online. Just fill up a little container with vodka and you'll be ending up spending 30 to 50 cents an ounce on it, something much less expensive than store-bought airbrush coloring. Of course, you'll need an airbrush. I'll talk more in a later video about my preferred airbrush, and a receptacle for dumping out spent airbrush coloring. So that's it. Ready to get started. So we're ready to start airbrushing. Of course, I like to cover my surface completely with paper towel because the airbrush coloring, though relatively focal, can go in places you don't want it to do, and that minimizes cleanup later. I also like to do a test shoot on paper with the colors I'm going to use just to make sure that I really like the composition. So as you can see, this is roughly what I'm headed toward, 6 colors on this piece. I like it, so I'm going to try to replicate that. But first I'm going to show you the wrong way to stencil a background. I'm not even going to put the masking piece on for this little exercise. I just want to show you the wrong way of handling the airbrush and how if you handle it improperly, it's going to be hard to get into close-fitting areas where things are overlapping, like where the bows overlap the egg or where the branches come close to the flower. Now for the backgrounds, I typically do put them in the Stenciled Genie, but I like to orient them so that the narrow end of the frame is facing down. That way it sort of sits suspended on the cookie. As you can see, it's not actually resting on the work surface, and that causes it to lie flatter. Now if I were to put the masking piece down, what the heck, let's just do that. Goes right here. I put it where I want my message to be, and then I do weight it down with magnets, and often several because the airbrush can blow it around. But now I'm just going to show you again the wrong way. I just want to show you how it's going to be tough to airbrush this area here well because the stencil's a little lifted from the edge. Ideally I could weight that down further, but we're not because I'm showing you the wrong way. And I'm also going to be spraying from quite a distance, so we're going to get the further away you spray, the more dispersion of spray you get. So it'll be messier. I'm also then going to spray from the side, and if you spray from the side, you're going to tend to go under the stencil. We're going to do all the things that you could do wrong, spraying too far away, not weighting down the stencil, and spraying from the side. There are probably other things you could do wrong too. And I'm going to show you the result, and then we'll do it the right way with all 6 colors. Here I'm going to use 2, just the blue and the purple on the egg, and we'll concentrate on that area that's a little tricky up here. So first I'm going to start with my blue, which is a custom mix, as I said, of royal blue, white and brown. Just need a couple of drops in here. I want to give it a test spray on the counter first. I like to use my cap always. I love this airbrush because it has a nice big cup and cap. There's a little brown that was in here from a previous run, so I'm shooting that through and I'm getting nice clear blue. So now if I were to spray up here, I'm going to get blue going everywhere, into the branches and everywhere else where I don't want it. So that's mistake number 1. If I shoot from the side, I'm going to probably get it going underneath this area where I wanted it to be all purple. If I shoot too close, I can really get the airbrush coloring to bead up, and then it will also flow under the stencil, so that's another thing you could do wrong. So you want to be close, but you typically always want to be directly overhead. I'm usually operating about 1 inch to 2 inches away, depending on how tight the spaces are together. So let me dump that blue out, and we'll just do a little purple on top. I'm going to try to flush most of it out, and then we'll load the blue and the purple in right behind it until it runs clear to purple. That's good. Now again, I'm going to make the mistake of starting too far up, and I want the bow to be purple, but if I start too far up, it's going to go into all these areas of the egg as well, and I'm going to have less control. Whereas if I get really close here and go slowly with light pressure at a 90-degree angle, I can be pretty focused in where that purple lands. And I think you'll see the comparison between here and here when I lift the stencil. So here, blurry mess that overflowed into all these other zones, whereas here when I was much closer at a 90-degree angle, low pressure, I had much more control over where the airbrush coloring went. So here we are with a fresh cookie. I'm going to be reusing the same stencil as before. As long as the airbrush coloring is dry and I can see through it, I can reuse it without cleaning it immediately. So I try to minimize cleaning between cookies as much as possible. So I've located that where I want it. I'm going to put down my little masking piece. I do want to have most of this egg exposed, so we're going to put it slightly off center. And a lot of weights on top so I don't blow it around. Now I am going to start light to dark. That'll just minimize the amount of cleaning that I need to do between colors. And I'm just going to shoot the center of each flower with a little bit of yellow. trying it on my work surface first. And again, as close and directly overhead as much as possible. I think I've got another flower I could capture, a little yellow over here. And I think that's it. Now, if I were doing a lot of cookies in a large production run, I'd probably have multiple stencils set up, and I'd do all one color at once. I would minimize the cleaning of my gun. But we're doing one today, so I'm just going to dump the excess in a receptacle here and flush with a little bit of alcohol. You can also push the alcohol through until it runs clear on a piece of paper towel to get a really true next color, but this color is pretty light, and I'll be putting pink up next, so a little bit of residual yellow is less likely to show through, though it may make my pink a little bit of orange. That's pretty good. So pink's up next. We're going to go close and get the outer sides of those flowers next. Now we're ready to move on to the next color. I think the next most light color is probably the green, so we'll do that next. I always test before I put it on the cookie, make sure it's coming out of the airbrush properly. It's better to do that off the cookie than on it. Now we're going to hit all the little leaves. And these are tiny areas, so I'm going to get a little bit closer than I did last time and push lightly, because I don't want to push too hard and get a lot of pooling of coloring on the cookie. So I'm about an inch away, I would say, at this point, and I'm getting very focused coverage that way. And that should do it. Clean the green and onto the blue. Testing on my work surface till it comes out nice. And I'm going to try to steer clear of the centers of each egg and just get the body, not those little decorative areas or the bows, because they're going to be purple. So again, pretty close. And I think that looks good. So we're back with our purple. Cleaned out the blue. It's extra important to clean the light blue out, because that white tends to stick in the gun. And now we're going to come in a really focused way around the ends of the bows, along the centers of the eggs. When you see the food coloring is starting to pool on top, it's time to back off, because it could be slipping underneath the stencil. And I think that covers the purple pretty well. And our last color is going to be the brown. I'm going to hit all those stems with it. Kind of looks like a mess right now, but I assure you when we lift it, it's going to look a lot cooler. And just going to try to fill in those stems and any leaves I missed. Like a leaf here probably would have been nicer green. I like to run off the edge of the stencil too a little bit to make sure there's coloring all the way to the edge of the cookie. And one last check. I think I've got every area, and we're ready for the grand reveal of the background, that is. Looks pretty. So I'm actually pretty proud of myself and how the stenciling job came out. Just so you're as proud of me as I am of myself, I just want to show these two things the right and wrong way side by side again. Look how much definition I have on this little egg at the top, whereas when I did everything the wrong way, it's just one big blur. So remember, a couple key things when handling the airbrush. I like to work on a relatively low pressure setting, probably not much more than 10 to 13 psi if you have a pressure gauge on it. Anything less than that and the airbrush doesn't really atomize well, it doesn't spray evenly, it'll speckle. So you want to be operating at that pressure, but not too much higher for close range work. I operate about 1 to 2 inches away when I'm really getting into tight areas, and I operate at a 90-degree angle to the cookie as opposed to some other angle where the food coloring can get under the stencil. So good, bad. Now we're ready to move on to the next step, which is an optional shading step using my shading stencil, which is nothing more than what's left over after the masking piece was cut out. And you can lay that on, line it up with where the masking piece was, and create shaded effects by dusting with petal dust or lightly spraying with airbrush coloring, which we're going to do here today. Just by point of contrast, I did not use the shading piece on this piece. You'll notice how clean it is and just pure white around the frame. Here I'm going to be brushing in a little bit of brown, what I have in the gun already. Very light touch at a further distance because I want it to be kind of speckly. And just to show you, just to give it kind of an antique-y sort of shading effect. The idea here is to bridge any gap between the masking piece and the frame and to come into the message area a little bit. And I want to give it a little light touch with more dispersion, so I'm going to be raising my gun in this particular application a little bit. And I'm going to just run it along the edge of the frame, ever so lightly. So now I'm more than 5 inches away and it's just really soft and a little speckly. And that's all I want there. So that just creates a nice little background shading that's going to accent the frame or the message, whichever you choose to put down next. Let me pause on that point a little bit. I'm airbrushing with all of these stencils today. Any one of them can be used separately with royal icing. However, if you are using them in this fully layered way and you want to use royal icing, you always have to put it down in the last step. If you put it down too soon, then any successive stencils won't sit flat on it. And it's important for the stencil to lie flush against the cookie to get a nice clean stencil. But we're just working with airbrush coloring today. So typically, if that's the case, I like to lay my frame down next. And I'm going to put it just like so, centering it on the area that I just shaded. And we're going to use blue for this. This is going down over a light brown background, so there might be a little bit of blending. This blue might appear a little less blue than the blue on the eggs, but we'll see. Again, getting pretty close. I'm probably going to go over this twice just to make sure I cover up the speckly brown that went down first, the shading aspect. That's all I'm going to do. I'm seeing my stencil begin to lift and I don't want to blow it around anymore. And that looks lovely. And the last step is laying down the message. And for that, I do want to pick up a color that I've already used on the cookie. Typically, that's what I do, just so that what's on the interior sort of coordinates with everything else. I think a logical choice could be purple or brown. I'm going to use brown. That's what I used on the other cookie, and I think it looks good. So just center it in the piece you just did. And I can do this right away as long as the airbrush coloring underneath is dry. If I apply too much and it's pooling in any area, then I'd want to wait for it to dry, but it looks pretty good. So I'm back with my brown ready to go. Try it on my work surface, looks good. I'm going to try to weight this a little closer to the words so I don't get any underspray. When the openings of the stencil are really close together, the food coloring tends to pool on top more and then potentially slip under. I find that happens with some of my words, which are really delicate. If you see it pooling up, stop, let it dry, and then come back with a second coat if you feel it needs to be a little bit darker, which I feel like it does. I think that looks great. We shall see. This is always the fun part. Ta-da! Beautiful. So just to contrast, the reason you see all this little brown speckling isn't because I sprayed improperly, it's because I decisively used that shading stencil. Had I not, it would look cleaner like the one over here. So you have your styling options. Sometimes this creates a more vintage effect, which is quite lovely. Now I'm a more is more person, so I'm going to finish this off with a border and maybe one other embellishment in the next step. So that really looks lovely as it is, right? But as I said, I really often can't leave well enough alone. So we're going to put my favorite signature border on, which is just simple dots. I don't want anything too jazzy because the piece itself is pretty jazzy. So I've got some purple dots that coordinate more or less with the bows on the eggs, maybe slightly lighter. And I'm using beadwork consistency again. For every cup of my icing glue, I add about 2 to 3 teaspoons of water so it flows nicely into a bead on its own with a nice rounded top. Kind of almost piping on the edge of the cookie. Now if you've got it on this non-skid surface, it also doesn't move around, but you can also rotate. If you remember, you can rotate it by the non-skid surface so you don't have to handle the edge of the cookie and potentially mess up the border you just piped. So I do like to work on this. There are also new little cookie turntables out that also allow for easy rotating. I find I always knock turntables prematurely, so I prefer to just put it on something that I can rotate when the time comes, like so. I can fit one more dot. There we go. I thought it'd be fun to top this off with something more dimensional because it is so one dimension when it's all airbrushed. If I were to have used a little bit of royal icing for the message or for the frame, there would have been some dimension already, but I hadn't done that. So I thought either putting a little wafer paper bow down to match the bow on the egg or one made out of modeling chocolate might look kind of nice. And I tend to prefer the one made out of modeling chocolate because it's just a little, this one's got a few little tears in it. So we're going to work with this one, and I'm just going to anchor it right there on the edge of the frame as one final accent. I have a whole nother video about how to make little bows like this out of modeling chocolate and fondant and ribbon work, so please consult that for how I made this little bow. And just sticking it down with a little bit of thick royal icing glue, just a touch. So I think that just looks perfect for Easter. Who needs chocolate Easter eggs and bunnies when you can have cookies as gorgeous as these? I've also, as a reminder, got another Easter egg set that just released, as well as a ton of other springy sets that would be perfect for this season. Just mixing and matching messages with other backgrounds could give you a vast array of Easter cookies with my existing line. But before I say so long and you get on to making Easter cookies, I wanted to show you one other tool from my line, which I think will come in super handy. Because at the end of the day, when you're done stenciling, you often have all these pieces floating around, particularly the tiny little masking piece has a tendency to want to get lost. So I've got this great little folio online. These little sleeves, if you will, come separately, these plastic sleeves, and I just load all my clean stencils of one type. I've got a lot of these Easter stencils into each bag, not forgetting the masking piece, and then they slip right into this great binder that I've got. I can fit anywhere from 20 to 30 stencils in here, no problem. So these are all available on stencilease.com. The link is in the video description. Till next video, live sweetly and have a happy Easter.